Today, we're throwing it back to Chicago in the 1890s. There, a man named HH Holmes tricked somewhere around 200 people into coming to his creepy-looking hotel nicknamed Murder Castle. I'm sure you can tell by the name, but the guests never checked out alive. Nowadays, H.H. Holmes is recognized as one of the first serial killers in America. So let's see what exactly this man did to inspire the sickos of today. Holmes' criminal career began with pretty mild offenses in comparison to where he ended up. He grew up in a wealthy New Hampshire household and showed signs of extreme intelligence at a young age. He also showed an extreme fascination with skeletons, the afterlife, and other dark topics. During his childhood, it wasn't unusual to see Holmes trapping animals and performing surgery on them. He then found a way to turn his weird fascination into something socially acceptable by pursuing medicine, which brings us to his first reported crimes. So Holmes went to the University of Michigan for medicine, and during this time there, he stole cadavers and tried to use them to make scammy insurance claims, which he actually got away with. So Holmes would burn and or mutilate the corpses to make it look like they passed away in an accident. Before that, he took out insurance policies on these people so that when they were found, he walked away with some cash. This was back in the 1880s, so it's safe to assume there weren't any official systems for logging casualties. Holmes graduated in 1884, and within the next year, he moved to Chicago, where he took a job working at a pharmacy under his new name, Dr. Henry H. Holmes. Shortly thereafter, the owner of the pharmacy Holmes worked at passed away. With the owner out of the picture, the store was left in the hands of his wife. But Holmes didn't like that. He wanted to be in charge. Holmes somehow convinced the wife to sell him the store, and shortly after that, she disappeared. Like never to be seen again type disappeared. Holmes claimed she moved to California, but that's never been proven. Most people assume Holmes offed her. Owning this drugstore wasn't fulfilling enough for Holmes, so he bought the empty lot across the street and started designing this big 3-story house. In 1889, construction began, but suspiciously enough, he kept hiring and firing all of these builders and construction guys, which most people assume is because he didn't want them to get the full picture of what this building actually was, a murder castle. Equipped with trap doors, secret passageways, soundproof rooms, doors that lock from the outside, gas jets, chutes that led to the basement, and a scorching hot kiln perfect for cremation. In 1891, the castle was finished and it looked pretty epic from the outside. Holmes bought newspaper ads to run job listings. He made it seem like the castle was a hotel and said he was looking for young women looking for work. If that doesn't already sound awful enough, he also posted several ads in the newspaper that said something along the lines of, "Wealthy businessman seeking beautiful wife." Holmes made all of his employees, hotel guests, fiancés, wives, visitors, I'm talking everybody, get life insurance policies. He said he would pay the premium as long as he was listed as the beneficiary. And to all of us, this is probably super sus, but that's because we live in this day and age where insurance money is one of the main reasons people kill. Back then, that wasn't really a thing. These people just thought Holmes really was just looking out for them. Also, not sure if you caught it, but I said fiancés and wives, and I meant it. Holmes loved to dabble in bigamy. And when one of his girlfriend's fiancés or wives got on his nerves, they suddenly disappear. So when these women would be labeled as deceased, guess who claimed all of their money and their assets? Even though we don't know a lot about Holmes's victims due to the time period and the exaggerations this story has acquired over the years, there are a few specific people we know about for sure. First up, the mother-daughter duo, Julia and Pearl Connor. Julia first met Holmes when she moved into his building with her husband, Ned, and their 6-year-old daughter, Pearl. Well, much to Ned's surprise, Holmes was shacking up with his wife behind his back, so once that came out, Ned quit and moved away, leaving Julia and Pearl behind. Julia and Holmes continued their relationship, and he apparently roped her into his sketchy business happenings. And then on Christmas Eve of 1891, Julia and Pearl just vanished into thin air. In the years following the disappearance, Holmes continually denied any involvement, but he later confessed to accidentally slaying her while performing an abortion. But also, there's no telling if that's the truth. I think he purposefully executed her and tried to make people feel bad with a cover-up. How else would the 6-year-old have lost her life too? Next up is Emmeline Segrant. She was an employee at the hotel who started working there in May of 1892 and vanished about 6 months later. Then there was Minnie and Nanny Williams. Minnie was an ex-actress who moved to Chicago near the beginning of 1893. Holmes gave her a job as his personal stenographer, aka someone who types up things like medical records and stuff. One way or another, Holmes found out Minnie owned property in Fort Worth, Texas, and he wanted that to be his. So he convinced Minnie to transfer the deed to some Alexander Bond, a fake name made up by Holmes. That April, the transfer was made, and guess who was the notary? Holmes himself. He was literally his own notary, but no one knew because the new deed owner had a fake name. Holmes later signed the deed owner to his business partner, but he also gave him an alias. In May, Minnie's sister Nanny came to visit. The women made plans to go to Europe, but they never made it there, and after July 5th, 1893, the Williams sisters were never seen again. Something else that happened in 1893 was the World's Fair, aka the Columbian Exposition, a huge event put on in Chicago to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus discovering a country that had already been discovered and inhabited by other people for many years. Millions of people made plans to travel to the Windy City to celebrate, which meant there were a lot of visitors looking for a place to stay. And wouldn't you know, Holmes had a hotel with empty rooms. Holmes was particularly excited for female guests because he thought that they would be easy to seduce to stay at his hotel. And sadly, a lot of people, women and men, fell for Holmes's scams. I mean, they needed a place to stay. Holmes had one. And how could they tell he was this villainous executioner right off the bat? No one knows how many victims Holmes claimed during this period, but numerous individuals would enter the castle and never exit. This was the general layout of the Holmes' murder castle. The first floor had several stores. The second and third floors had over 100 bedrooms that people could stay in, as well as Holmes' office. Sprinkled throughout the mansion were a lot of those creepy things I mentioned earlier, like trapdoors, gas chambers, and soundproof rooms that made it really easy for Holmes to sneak around the castle. Holmes most often suffocated his victims by making them inhale chloroform, sealing them in vaults with no air, and putting them in his homemade gas chambers. He also allegedly starved some and burned some alive. As if that already doesn't sound awful enough, wait until you hear what Holmes would do to these poor people once they were officially lifeless. He would send their corpses down a chute that led into a makeshift basement lab where there was a dissecting table, a stretching rack, and kiln for cremating, of course. Well, just like he used to do to animals as a kid and cadavers as a med student, Holmes would poke and prod his victims, cut open their organs, rip off their flesh, and do all sorts of other disgusting things to them. After all of that, Holmes would leave just the victims' skeletons behind, and he would sell them to medical students to use as human skeleton models. He also sold their organs on the black market. For those victims who didn't make it to the skeleton or organ market, their bodies would be cremated or even thrown into pits of acid. Aside from the time and having no cell phones and such, another reason Holmes got away with executing all these people without immediately getting caught is that most of the individuals he targeted were out-of-towners. So most victims didn't have any family or friends nearby to determine their whereabouts and even conclude that they were even missing. So here's how things eventually fell apart for Holmes. Before and during the big fair in Chicago, Holmes traveled all around the country with his little partner in crime, Benjamin Pitzel. They tricked people into their typical insurance scams and continued to fill their pockets with other people's money they didn't deserve. But after the fair ended, Chicago suffered a blow to its economy, which meant Holmes wasn't getting many guests to stay at his hotel, and it wasn't making him that much money. Not that he ever made money from the actual rooms, it was the money he stole from the victims he iced. Anyway, with Chicago's crappy economy, Holmes decided to go all in on the traveling insurance schemes he did with his buddy Benjamin, which still involved slaying people as well as other weird and terrible things. While in Texas one time, Holmes stole a bunch of horses, shipped them to St. Louis, and sold them for a lot of money. Well, the dude got caught in this scheme, which landed him in jail for a very short period. He made friends with his cellmate, Marion Hedgepath, and the two got to plotting their next sting. Holmes told Marion he was going to take out a $10,000 life insurance policy on himself, fake his death, and then Marion would collect and share the wealth with him. As soon as Holmes got out of jail, he carried out his plan, but the insurance company thought something seemed wrong and they held off on paying out the money. With no end in sight and not really wanting to get caught, Holmes just decided to abandon that attempt and go to Philadelphia to carry out a similar scam with Benjamin. This time, Benjamin was the one who was supposed to fake his own demise. The plan was that Benjamin would pretend to be an inventor named B.F. Perry, who was to tragically lose his life in an explosion in his lab. Holmes sought out a cadaver that looked like Benjamin, but somewhere along the way, he ditched that plan and decided to kill the guy for real using chloroform. After Benjamin was out cold, Holmes set his body on fire using the highly flammable chemical benzene to help speed things up. Holmes then went to get some of the insurance money from Benjamin's wife. She knew about the whole scheme and genuinely thought her husband was still alive at first, so she gave Holmes $500. But Benjamin had 5 kids, and Holmes was scared one of them was going to tell the authorities on him, so he decided to execute 3 of them to make sure they didn't rat him out. While all this was going on, Marion, Holmes' old cellmate, was livid Holmes ditched her, so she decided to alert the authorities about his crimes. The police knew this guy was no good and set out to find him. In November of 1894, they tracked him down in Boston, Massachusetts, and arrested him. Police officers searched Holmes' castle, where they found all of his disturbing contraptions, as well as terribly decomposed, mutilated, and burned bodies. Holmes eventually went to trial for slaying Benjamin, which he was found guilty for. He received the ultimate penalty, which back in the day was a hanging. In the end, Holmes confessed to slaying around 27 or 28 people, but through investigating missing persons reports and such, most people believe that number is actually around 200. After Holmes was executed in May of 1896, his castle was remodeled as a tourist attraction dubbed the Holmes Horror Castle, which burned down a few days before it was supposed to open. That would only give other creeps ideas. Honestly, I almost feel weird telling you about the story because I don't want to give Holmes clout, but I feel like I did a pretty good job painting the hideous portrait of who this guy really was. What do you think? Guys, thank you so much for watching another episode of Killer Bites. My name is Mack, and I hope to see you guys again soon.